No problem.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I have to hop off, so I'll pop back in about an hour. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again for your time. So next in the program, right before we break for lunch, we have Ms. Karen Tuqiri. Karen is the Director of Nursing at Prince of Wales Hospital in the southeastern Sydney Local Health District. She's also an Associate Adjunct Professor at the University of Technology, Sydney. Her programs of work that Karen leads focus on workforce development, quality improvement, patient safety, and implementing evidence-based practice change while developing a deeper understanding of the influence of leadership on workplace culture. She is a current PhD candidate with the area of study focused on developing a deeper understanding of the relationship person-centered practice has on patient safety outcomes. Please join me in welcoming Karen as she presents on a strategy for transforming person-centered cultures, a journey of co-creation.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for the invite to present today. It's lovely to see so many colleagues and friends online and familiar faces. Before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge the land that I am presenting from, the land of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders and Aboriginal people with us today. So I'm really proud to be able to present this program of work on behalf of our LHD Director of Nursing, Kate Hackett, as well as my peers, which are the Directors of Nursing of all of our hospitals and LHD services, such as mental health and population and community health services from across Southeast Sydney LHD. I guess I'm proud because this work really was an opportunity for us to step out of our operational spaces and come together professionally to reflect on the current healthcare context, and through facilitation have strategic thinking together about what was important for all people now and into the future. But also, more importantly, what I feel this program of work enabled was the opportunity as nursing and midwifery leaders was to explore person-centeredness and what did it actually mean to us as individuals, but as leaders of our profession. And also provided us an opportunity to think about the now, but also create a vision around the future. And today's presentation, I will obviously take you through the strategy and the outcome and the final document and the content, but I think it's about the journey of co-creation that I really wanted to highlight today, because I think that it's not very common for directors of nursing to come together in a space of reflection and through facilitation be able to make sense of things together and explore and challenge and each other to think in different ways, but also to appreciate the level of influence we have on change and transforming a culture in which we want care to be delivered and care to be received. So this strategy, I believe, builds on the work within CESLID that's already been occurring for many years, but it will have long-lasting impacts both now and into the future. It's also something that I think is quite unique, and we are writing a paper as a small group of directors of nursing about this process, because in the literature, it's not very common for directors of nursing to provide evidence around processes and systems and approaches that they've used to impact the system. And therefore, there was a significant gap in the literature. We also are very appreciative of the work and the support of Professor Tanya McCants, who has worked alongside of us for the last 18 months to achieve this. So next slide. So just a little bit about us in case where we're positioned. Southeast Sydney Local Health District is on the eastern side of Sydney along the coastline. We go from Helensburgh in the south and all the way through to the CBD, where Sydney Eye Hospital is located. We have 9 hospitals, including a small facility in Lord Howe Island, as well as district mental health services and district population and community health services. And I think that's important to note, because what this work brought together was 10 directors of nursing to work together to develop the strategy, which I think is important. Next slide. So just to highlight that we had a strategy as a district from 2015 to 2020. And I think this is where we leveraged our discussions, and we weren't starting from a blank canvas. We had done some strategic thinking, but there had been a lot of change in roles, new leaders in the directors of nursing positions. But it's important to acknowledge the past, and that was something that we did early on and at the front end of this process, so that we could use that to move us forward into the future. Next slide. So this, I think, is probably one of the most important slides of the whole presentation, and that's the journey. I think this co-creation of a strategy was something that I felt quite privileged to be a part of. And we had over 11 workshops together. 10 of those were virtual, and Tanya McCants facilitated those virtually while she was in Northern Ireland. We were here in Sydney together, and it would not have been possible without her leadership and her sort of transition to that virtual space and virtual facilitation, which we knew we were taking a risk around, because, as you know, some of this work needs some context, and it also needs some awareness in facilitation around body language and what's happening in a space and what's happening in the room. And I was really privileged to be that co-facilitator with Tanya, so that I could read what was happening in the room and sort of call out or ask another probing question to explore further. But we had these 11 workshops, and I guess a really important part of that was to explore person-centeredness and really understand, from a shared understanding and a shared language, what did that mean to all of us, no matter what facility or service we were coming from. And that there was a lot of debate, there was a lot of different words, and we heard, I think, in Brendan's presentation, language, how important that we can get all tied up in it, when we just need to understand what we're talking about. What is it that this means to us? And so we explored that at the first 4 workshops that took together shared understanding. We then moved into values clarification, which I think is essential to really ground us as a group of leaders and really understand what was important. And we collectively developed a shared understanding of our values, which I'll share with you soon. The next step was that we needed to go back to our facilities and work with our teams around what was important and what were our priorities, what were some of the challenges, what's the things that keep us up at night, and understand those and start articulating those. So we brought all of those back, and we ended up with 15 priorities, way too many, and we knew that was going to be really unachievable. We then did some consensus sort of building and working through, and we narrowed it down to 7, which I'm going to go through today. I think once we had the 7, the thing I wanted to highlight next was a really important part of going out to all staff in the workforce for nursing and midwifery and understanding what they thought of these priority areas. That involved all AINs, ENs, RNs, CNSs, our CNCs, our educators, and our managers. And we ended up with 3,000 comments on the priority areas, a huge volume of information that, as a group of directors of nursing, we were like a bit overwhelmed with at the beginning. But through Tanya's facilitation and sort of processes, we started to theme and bring these down and really start to make the changes that the staff told us were necessary to make this strategy meaningful for all, but also really easy to read and connect with, if anyone could pick it up and connect with. And that was something that we thought was important. We also engaged our non-nursing and midwifery staff and got their comments as well, as a different perspective and a different view of where this sort of positioned nursing within the multidisciplinary team lens, but also more broadly in the healthcare lens when we went to our corporate services and other non-clinical staff. We had a town hall session where we introduced the priority action areas as well. And that again opened up more discussion and more understanding on the path that the Nursing and Midwifery Directorate were heading down. And you can see there, we also went for some external review, and we ended up having 19 versions of the strategy. So that refinement and constant review was this ongoing, evolving process that was very, very much driven by the feedback that we were receiving. We finally launched the actual document on the November 6th last year, and we were very fortunate to have both Brendan and Tanya, both in Sydney, both able to share the space with our district and launch it. And really, that has been an 18-month journey in one slide, but I think it's the conversations and the processes that I wanted to highlight today. Next slide. So as I've said, the process was facilitated and supported by Tanya McCants, and we are very grateful for her dedication, her expertise, her passion, but also her courage to take the risk around virtual facilitation with us. That was a risk, and we were very conscious of that throughout. But as I said before, we had to start with understanding what person-centeredness meant to us. And we had to explore if we're using the person-centered practice framework and the outcome is a healthful culture, whilst we had a definition, what did that mean in practice? And I think those conversations are ones that we hold on to and we go back to time and time again, and particularly now in the implementation phase. So the next slide, please. These are our values. So our strategy is underpinned by a set of shared values. Now, strangely enough, when we did the values clarification exercise, we couldn't do that virtually. It might surprise you because it just did not work. It fell flat over 2 sessions, and Tanya and I thought, we can't keep persevering here. We're going to lose engagement of the Dons if we don't find another way. And very fortunately, we had 2 very skilled facilitators in the district team that brought us together in a face-to-face room, and we went through a VCE in its traditional sense, which was, again, another first time for many of the Dons in the group. But what did happen was the first 6 values came out the same as the previous strategy. So care, integrity, respect, influence, innovation, and inspiration were exactly the same as the previous document. But what came out was a 7th value around courage. And this largely, when the descriptor around it became about being brave and lead through the use of our voice and action, which I think was a lovely addition and really reflective of the time when we were doing this work, which was from 2021 onwards through the pandemic. Hence why we went through a number of the virtual sort of requirements. Next slide. So our purpose statement, a really important component of this strategy and the use of the VCE was to have a common purpose as a group of professional leaders. And this is it. And I think I keep going back to this statement. I just think you can hang so much from it when you're having conversations with your teams. But for us, the purpose of person-centered practice is to enhance the human experience. This can be achieved by co-creating positive workplace cultures to provide safe, quality, and compassionate care. This will be underpinned by authentic behaviours that foster a shared understanding and innovative approaches to practice that will support positive outcomes. And I guess this is what we got a lot of feedback from the staff, and a lot of those 3,000 comments were in relation to this purpose statement. So it has been shaped by a very large number of nurses and midwives to get to this point. But it is definitely the anchor of this strategy alongside the values. Next slide. A lot of words on here. I'm going to go and break this down in a little bit simpler way in the following slides, but just to give you a sense that the document on the left on the screen is a quite a thick document of the strategy, which goes through the 7 priority areas, action priorities, as well as some best practice exemplars that currently exist in the district. But the larger document there is the 1-pager, and this has been distributed to every leader across the district and is used in various launches. But it is very simple to go through with teams and to pull apart where you're at as a facility, which I'll touch on in the implementation. Next slide. So as you can see, not strangely enough, but we did use the person-centered practice framework to underpin the development of the strategy. And once we had our 7 priority areas, they very easily mapped to different elements of the framework. And I guess this was another important step for us as directors of nursing to see how a strategic framework and be used as a tool and map the actual actions that we want to prioritise and invest in. So this was, again, a really nice check-in around where this sort of work was going to be positioned. Next slide. So our 7 priority areas, I just wanted to run through those. So the first one is developing person-centered cultures. And, you know, this descriptor around why this is important is because we need to have courageous conversations about the key influences and areas that we felt were most important now and into the future. And we use the PCPF as an underlying guide to these discussions. I think this one really is at the heart of what we're hoping to achieve in general. But placing people at the centre is at the core of our strategy, and ensuring that all people feel valued and respected is essential to ensure the care that we're providing is based on collaborative relationship, and that the opportunity for all persons to reach their full potential is possible. Next slide. Our next priority is around creating a supportive practice environment. And this was really important around acknowledging and having an awareness of the impact of the environment in which care is delivered. It is essential to ensure we actively address those influences impacting on our ability to provide safe person-centred care. Working collaboratively to create the conditions that support person-centred practice is the focus of this priority, and incorporates our understanding of skill mix, shared decision-making, organisation of care, and the impact of the physical environment in what we do. Again, another really important element within the framework. Next slide. Next priority is around building research capacity. Again, that's not surprising. Most strategies talk about research, but for us, it was around curiosity and evaluation of practice using research process to enable the translation of best practice evidence into our care, ensuring that our nurses and midwives have the skills, resources, and confidence to actively engage in research and development activities would be our first step in creating a culture that is evidence-based and innovative. Next slide. Building a dynamic workforce. I guess we know that to ensure we attract and retain nurses and midwives in CESLID, we must invest in and ensure clearly defined professional career pathways that support work-based learning, and the development of the skills and knowledge is essential to be able to work across the continuum of care and across multiple different contexts. And this is that really important part of being able to work with both the acute setting, but also our community and population health services, as well as our mental health services as well. And this was a really big part of our discussion as directors of nursing. The next slide is around fostering leadership at all levels. We know leadership provides an opportunity to advocate and influence for what is important. And we hope that we develop and support leaders at all levels who have a shared understanding of our values, the behaviours and actions that support person-centred practice. And this will have a significant impact for all. And through leadership, we'll be able to develop a shared understanding of the importance of healthful cultures for all people in our settings. Next slide. This was also another priority area that had a lot of feedback, and I guess it's not surprising given the volume of change and advancement around digital informatics and new technologies and the impact that has had on nursing practice and midwifery practice. So we felt this was a really important one around understanding the impact of technology and the rapid development of virtual healthcare models that nurses and midwives need to understand and work with, so that we could be on the front foot and lead and discuss the implications of this advancement on our practice and be able to evaluate it. Our role, we believe, as nurses and midwives, needs to ensure a balance between the use of technology and the provision of care that is person-centred and considers the person at its centre. And so this is one that I know we're spending a lot of time locally in Prince of Wales thinking about this strategic action and working through those 5 dot points, trying to understand how we're currently doing it. It is probably the largest gap for us in this strategy at the moment. And the next slide is a priority area which is not going to surprise you, around delivering high quality, safe, person-centred care. We know that nurses and midwives are influential in shaping the culture and focus on patient safety, whilst maintaining positive and healthful relationships that overall impact on the workplace culture that exists. So the focus of this priority area is the ability of nurses and midwives to make sense of their practice through focusing on clinical outcome, the experience of care, and the impact of the care environment, which is really important in supporting improvement and innovation work. Next slide. So this was our launch photo. It was great to have all of our directors of nursing, Tanya and Brendan, together with our district team leads. But we had the whole sort of tier 2 executive, as well as many different stakeholders who had contributed to the document and provided feedback in the room to launch and talk about why this is important as a group of nursing and midwifery leaders for the future, which was a wonderful event. Next slide. A really important part of the event was to bring this strategy to life a little and to really call out the existing bodies of work and the best practice exemplars that were happening across our services already, where the alignment could be seen. So we talked through a number of the best practice exemplars, and in the larger strategy document, these exemplars are written up in more detail around the work and the ethos of the work and the outcomes that it's been achieving, so that that strategy isn't just a strategy that's on a shelf, but it's actually, this is what it means in practice. And that alignment was a really important step, I think, so that people can connect to it and actually see how what we talk about strategic, but this is actually in practice. Next slide. So the way forward, I think it's important, developing a strategy. It took us 18 months. We felt very confident with the level of consultation and collaboration and inclusiveness that we were able to achieve, but it has to be more than just the launch. And so we've spent a lot of our energy over December, January and February working with Tanya in the implementation. So we did have a Don workshop face-to-face when Tanya was in Sydney, where we actually unpacked elements of what we felt would enable the implementation. So we talked about governance, we talked about measurement, we talked about existing evidence of practice and data that nurses and midwives access to look at outcomes. And we able to think about, well, what will enable us as individual leaders to implement this in our own facilities, in our own context, and what do we need from a professional development point of view? So that workshop really was the first sort of part of implementation after the launch. We since have had a number of facility launches where the directors of nursing and the district team have met with large numbers of staff and had an event where we again talked about the strategy but brought it to life with local initiatives that would align to the strategy. We currently are doing a number of mapping exercises where I'm working and the Dons are working with their leaders and with different groups to understand what have we got already in these different priority areas, but largely where are the gaps? What do we need to do more of? Where do we need to turn our attention to work towards the overall outcome? And so that's work that's currently happening at the moment. We've had additional workshop just this week with Tanya, exploring the governance structure. We're working through really being courageous in maybe throwing up the existing committee structure and thinking about a shared governance model across the district. It's a huge undertaking, obviously with levels of risk and uncertainty, but we're exploring that at the moment, just keeping in the front of mind our commitment around what we're hoping to achieve, but knowing that the principle of shared governance is important and the development of communities of practice across the district will be essential for like minds to come together and start and continue the conversations in each priority area. So that's really, really exciting. We also, as directors of nursing, indicated that we felt some clinical supervision would be helpful for us as professional leads to unpack some of our challenges, be able to talk with each other, share, learn from each other. And so that also has been supported by our district Don, and that will be commencing the first week of March as well, which I guess just thinking about all the different enablers that will work together to ensure this strategy isn't just something that sits on the shelf is really critical. We're also working through evaluation measures, and that will be future workshops where we actually start to identify what they are, where they're kept, who collects them, and how we can actually make them really visible and transparent around as we progress down our journey of implementation. How we can celebrate will also be a really important feature. Next slide. This is just some examples from our Don workshop. I guess, it was very, very much facilitated, but we used claims, concerns, issues. We used lots of group work, lots of conversations, and lots of opportunity to be creative in our thinking, which was really well received throughout the day. Next slide. So just to finish, we're really proud that we've got to this point. I think what I've observed over the 18 months is the change in relationships between us as directors of nursing and our commitment and common purpose we often go back to. We have strengthened our relationships. We have a very clear direction for the future, and we have a shared understanding around what person-centeredness means to us. Therefore, how we communicate and talk with our teams also has a common sort of theme and thread, but we can contextualize it to what each of our hospitals requires, which I think is a real benefit from this strategy. It's not locked into something that is a cookie cutter approach. It has the flexibility and the ability to contextualize it. But just a final word for us, that we are committed to working collaboratively and providing assurance that this strategy will be an active document and will provide the foundations for our actions, behaviours, and our future direction. And that's all. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was like a huge amount of work that you have undertaken in the last little bit. My goodness. I'm sure we have a couple of minutes. We could squeeze in a couple of questions before anyone goes to lunch. Anyone have anything they want to say to Karen or ask? I think everyone's just gobsmacked by the amount of work that you've done.
I think just to finish, I think it's really interesting when you work in the macro space and then you know to influence the micro and at the where care is being delivered and the relationships at that level. It's a very interesting space to work through, and something I have felt very privileged to be a part of. It's something that I've never experienced before with my peers, and something that I will hold on to, and we're all very excited now working with our own teams in this way, and working out the elements at each of our facilities and services, which again is really important.
Bev, did you want to say something? Oh no, the microphone's not working. Okay, maybe put it in the chat. Yes, I can see someone with their hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Karen, thank you so much. I was just going to share that I only came into this space towards the end of, I think it was just at the beginning of the 19 versions. But it was quite an amazing place to be in. And I think having had a lot of discussions with a lot of groups across the district, it is for some a really uncomfortable place, because it is for some people seen as quite soft, but it doesn't take long for them to connect to the processes that we're using and the outcomes of the strategy, potential outcomes of the strategies. And I think that's it's an absolute credit to everybody who's been involved in the work. So thank you. Sorry, that wasn't a question. That was more of a comment.
That's fine. That was a great comment. Thank you very much. Karen, I wondered if you met any challenges in implementing the person-centered practice framework into your work, something you wish that could be part of the person-centered practice framework.
To be honest, we have thought about that, and with Tanya, we've had some really robust discussions, but everything we called out, we could find a place in the framework where it actually could fit. So we didn't find anything from memory that was left field to any of the elements. I guess the important thing that I have heard this morning is around the cultural safety element, and I mean, that has given me a lot to think about as well. And technology, I know it's not really explicit in the framework, in the care environment element, but I think the impact of technology and virtual health is important to note within the framework as well, somewhere now, because it is the way of being and the way that we're sort of progressing as an element of care. So I think they're probably the two things for me: cultural safety and the technology and virtual health.
A great answer, Karen. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Karen? Is everyone starving? I suppose you can't talk to this web, can you? We'll come back to this, but we'll leave these dates up for the webinar series that we're going to be having. And over the lunchtime period too, if there is any thoughts, reflections, challenges, or provoking comments that you might want to have, there's a Padlet there that Web's sharing there with the QR code that you can go to share on that. So we are going to be coming back at 1:15 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So that is in about 35 minutes. So grab something to eat, stretch your legs, have a nice break, and we'll see you back then. Thank you all very much for your participation this morning. Did you want to say something, Ria? No.